The Hawker Hurricane may not have had the glamour of the Spitfire, but when Germany first encountered it, the reactions were far from dismissive. To the Luftwaffe, this aircraft was a puzzle, sturdy, reliable, and surprisingly lethal. While German propaganda often painted the Hurricane as second-rate, their pilots and commanders soon realized it was a machine that demanded respect. The shocking truth lies in how Germany truly viewed Britain's workhorse fighter. First encounters, the RAF's surprise weapon. When the Hawker Hurricane first entered the skies against the Luftwaffe, most German airmen didn't quite know what to make of it. In their intelligence briefings, the aircraft barely merited attention. It was overshadowed by the newer Spitfire, and many Germans assumed it was outdated, even second-rate. Its construction, with fabric-covered wings on early models, seemed archaic compared to the sleek, all-metal Messerschmitt Bf-109s. The Germans thought they were facing an inferior opponent. But when the battles began in earnest over France in 1940, perceptions changed quickly. The Hurricane's role was immediately apparent. It was a bomber killer. Squadrons of Hurricanes dove into Heinkels and Dorniers with startling ferocity, ripping through their formations with concentrated firepower. Each Hurricane carried 8.303 Browning machine guns, a devastating armament for the time, and German bomber crews were stunned at how effectively it shredded through their aircraft. Reports from Luftwaffe squadrons began filtering back to commanders. The Hurricane wasn't fast, but it was solid. It could turn tightly, handle reliably, and most importantly, withstand significant battle damage. Pilots reported frustration at firing long bursts into Hurricanes, only to see them stagger but continue fighting, or worse, escape back to base. Unlike fragile interwar fighters, the Hurricane seemed built for endurance. German bomber crews, in particular, grew to loathe the Hurricane. Unlike the Spitfire, which often tangled with escorts, the Hurricane's focus was directly on them. Crews felt hunted by swarms of British fighters that ignored the glamour of duels with the 109s and instead prioritized tearing apart bomber groups. To the Germans in the air, this created a psychological edge. The Hurricane wasn't glamorous, but it was relentless. In the first real clashes of the war, the Luftwaffe discovered the truth. Britain's other fighter was no pushover. It was designed to fight hard, endure punishment, and inflict losses where it mattered most. What began as dismissive overconfidence soon turned into grudging respect. The Hurricane, underestimated from the start, had announced itself as a real threat to Germany's war machine. The shadow of the Spitfire. Why the Hurricane was overlooked. For the Germans, the Hurricane's greatest advantage was also its greatest disguise. It stood in the shadow of the Spitfire. When British fighters were discussed in German intelligence circles, the Spitfire took all the attention. It was the sleek, modern, cutting-edge fighter, the one with elliptical wings and impressive speed. By contrast, the Hurricane was regarded as old-fashioned, a leftover from an earlier era of aviation. This dismissal allowed the Hurricane to operate underappreciated, but not unnoticed. German planners prepared their pilots for Spitfires. Luftwaffe propaganda elevated the Spitfire into Britain's best and only fighter, convincing many that defeating it was all that mattered. In truth, while Spitfires were busy clashing with the Bf-109s, it was the Hurricanes that bore the brunt of fighting against Germany's bomber fleets. By the summer of 1940, this reality became undeniable. Luftwaffe bomber crews began reporting that most of their attackers weren't Spitfires but Hurricanes, and far from being obsolete, these aircraft were effective, deadly even. Their machine guns concentrated on bombers' weak points with ruthless efficiency. Crews described the sight of Hurricanes ripping into their squadrons as both terrifying and demoralizing. The Hurricane's supposed shortcomings, its bulkier frame, slower speed, and simpler design, turned out to be strengths in many ways. It was easier to build and repair, meaning Britain could keep squadrons in the air at a pace Germany struggled to match. It was stable in flight, allowing even inexperienced RAF pilots to fight effectively. And it was rugged, shrugging off punishment that German fighters expected to bring down their targets. By the end of the Battle of Britain, Germany's view had shifted. The Spitfire was admired, yes, but the Hurricane was feared for its practicality. Luftwaffe crews began referring to it as the true shield of Britain, the unsung fighter that inflicted most of their losses. The Germans had underestimated it, and in doing so, they paid the price. Battle of France. The Hurricane proves its worth. The Hurricane's first real proving ground against the Luftwaffe came during the Battle of France in 1940. When Germany unleashed its blitzkrieg, the RAF rushed Hurricanes across the Channel to aid French and Belgian forces. German confidence was high. They expected their Bf-109s and Bf-110s to sweep aside Allied air resistance with ease. But in the skies over France, the Hurricane showed that it was more than capable of challenging the Luftwaffe. During bombing runs, German Heinkels and Dorniers were suddenly met by swarms of Hurricanes diving into their formations. Crews were stunned at the ferocity of these attacks. Unlike earlier Allied interceptors, the Hurricane brought firepower and aggression in equal measure. Those 8 machine guns tore through bomber wings and engines, forcing defensive gunners into frantic action. Losses mounted quickly, and bomber crews began to dread the sight of the angular British fighter diving toward them. German fighter pilots also encountered surprises. While the Bf-109 retained speed and climb advantages, many Luftwaffe aces admitted that the Hurricane could outturn them in certain situations. If drawn into a turning fight, the Hurricane's stability and handling gave RAF pilots an edge. More troubling still, the aircraft could take punishment. Luftwaffe veterans described watching Hurricanes trailing smoke, riddled with bullets yet refusing to fall. Many limped home, patched up, and returned to the skies the next day. By the end of the Battle of France, Germany realized the Hurricane was no outdated relic. It was a frontline fighter, capable of damaging Germany's confidence in its air superiority. For the Luftwaffe, the campaign that was supposed to showcase their dominance revealed cracks in their assumptions. The Hurricane had not only survived its first major clash with Germany, it had proven itself as a rugged, determined opponent. To the Luftwaffe, this was a sobering revelation. The war in the skies would not be as easy as they had hoped, and Britain's sturdy workhorse would be at the heart of the resistance. German test flights and intelligence reports. Despite initial dismissal, Germany eventually got its hands on several captured Hurricanes. These aircraft were flown, dissected and analyzed by Luftwaffe engineers who were eager to understand what made the plane so effective. What they discovered challenged many of their earlier assumptions. On the test fields, German pilots noted the Hurricane's forgiving handling. Unlike the sharp, high-performance edge of the Bf-109, the Hurricane was steady, easy to fly, and stable at low speeds. This explained why young RAF pilots, many with limited flight hours, could handle it confidently in combat. The Hurricane didn't demand finesse. It rewarded discipline and courage, qualities Britain had in abundance during 1940. Reports also highlighted the Hurricane's robust design. The use of fabric covering on parts of the aircraft had been mocked by German propaganda as outdated, yet engineers quickly realized it had an unexpected advantage. Battle damage often tore fabric cleanly, avoiding catastrophic failures. Combined with its sturdy airframe, this made the Hurricane surprisingly survivable. In terms of firepower, German testers respected its 8 Browning 303 machine guns, which could unleash devastating short bursts. Against bombers, this was particularly deadly, explaining the heavy Luftwaffe losses during daylight raids. Engineers admitted privately that while the Hurricane was slower than the Bf-109, its armament and ruggedness made it far more effective than they had given it credit for. Captured intelligence also revealed the strategic logic behind the Hurricane. It was quick to build, cheaper than the Spitfire, and easy to repair. For Germany, locked into the idea of high-performance fighters, this philosophy was unsettling. It meant Britain could replace losses faster, keeping its squadrons full while the Luftwaffe struggled to maintain numbers in prolonged campaigns. These test flights and reports shifted German views. The Hurricane was no longer a second-class fighter. It was a cleverly engineered weapon of war, designed for practicality, survivability, and volume. Germany learned the hard way that underestimating such a machine came with a heavy price. Tactical countermeasures. How the Luftwaffe adapted. Faced with mounting losses, the Luftwaffe had to adapt. By late 1940, German commanders began developing specific tactics to counter the Hurricane. One approach was to exploit its weaknesses in speed and climb. Bf-109 pilots were instructed to avoid turning dogfights with Hurricanes, where the British fighters' maneuverability could surprise them. Instead, they were ordered to dive in from above, fire quick bursts, and climb back out of reach. Bomber formations were also adjusted. Rather than relying solely on escorts to fend off Hurricanes, bombers began flying in tighter defensive groups with overlapping gun arcs. This, however, often limited their maneuverability, making them more predictable targets for coordinated RAF attacks. Another adaptation was the increasing use of the twin-engined Bf-110 as a bomber destroyer to counter Hurricanes. The idea was that heavier cannons could bring the rugged British fighter down faster. In practice, however, the Bf-1.10 proved vulnerable to both Hurricanes and Spitfires, and the plan largely failed. Perhaps the most telling adaptation came from German bomber crews themselves. Many began changing attack altitudes, timing raids to reduce the chances of Hurricane interceptions. Yet, despite these efforts, the Hurricanes kept coming. RAF squadrons were relentless, and even when shot down, Britain replaced them quickly. Luftwaffe reports during this time show a mix of grudging respect and deep frustration. The Hurricane wasn't unbeatable, but it refused to be pushed aside. German pilots increasingly recognized that each raid would cost them dearly, and morale began to fray under the constant attrition. The truth was that no matter what tactical countermeasures Germany devised, the Hurricane always found a way back into the fight. It was less about outclassing the Luftwaffe and more about grinding it down, a quality Germany came to dread. Legacy: the Hurricane in German memory. After the war, German veterans were often asked about their impressions of British fighters. While many spoke of the Spitfire with respect for its speed and grace, it was the Hurricane that lingered in their memories as the true nemesis of 1940. For bomber crews, the Hurricane became synonymous with fear. Survivors recalled the sudden roar of its guns, the sight of fabric and metal frames diving in with grim determination. Many admitted that their heaviest losses in 1940 came not from Spitfires, but from relentless waves of Hurricanes cutting into their formations. Fighter pilots, meanwhile, remembered the Hurricane for its toughness. Bf-109 aces recounted battles where they believed they had crippled a Hurricane, only to see it keep flying. Some even described the aircraft as indestructible, a plane that absorbed punishment beyond reason. This durability left a lasting impression, shaping German perceptions of British engineering as more practical and war-ready than their own sleek designs. In German post-war writings, the Hurricane was often portrayed as the unsung hero of the RAF, an aircraft underestimated in propaganda but respected in reality. Many Luftwaffe veterans admitted that if the Hurricane had not been present in such vast numbers during the Battle of Britain, the outcome could have been very different. The legacy was clear. The Hurricane didn't win admiration for beauty or speed, but for effectiveness and persistence. In German memory, it became the fighter that wore them down, the one that turned their early confidence into attrition and frustration. To the Luftwaffe, the shocking truth was undeniable. The Hurricane was the workhorse that broke their momentum and ensured Britain survived 1940. In the end, the shocking truth about Germany's view of the Hurricane is that it was never just Britain's second fighter. German propaganda downplayed it, and intelligence analysts initially dismissed it, but those who actually faced it in combat came away with a very different impression. For bomber crews, the Hurricane was a nightmare, its 8 guns tearing into Heinkels and Dorniers with ruthless efficiency. Fighter pilots quickly learned it could outturn them in a fight and absorb damage that should have sent it spiraling down. Even German engineers, after testing captured Hurricanes, admitted it was a clever design, simple to repair, fast to produce, and surprisingly resilient. The Spitfire may have captured the headlines, but it was the Hurricane that carried the weight of the Battle of Britain. German veterans later confessed that without the Hurricane, the outcome could have been very different. In German memory, the Hurricane became not a relic, but a reminder that underestimation can be deadly.